Have you ever been congratulated with one hand, while the other hand is already pushing you out the door? That's exactly what happened to me. They called it the Innovation Gala. Spotlights, music, glass trophies lined up like bait. I stood there, on stage, smiling at a room full of executives who were clapping like I'd saved the company. Because I had. I secured the biggest deal in our history, $800 million. A deal that would have saved them from massive layoffs, declining stock and years of stagnation. But as I held that sleek, heavy award in my hand, etched with my name no less, someone from HR handed me a sealed envelope. I didn't think much of it. I thought maybe it was some follow-up documentation, maybe a bonus contract, or hell, maybe just a thank you letter. I was wrong. I opened it in my office later that night. My name was there all right, but not for the reason I thought. Your role has been eliminated as part of an internal restructuring. That was the line. Neat, sterile, and utterly devastating. At first, I just stared at the page. No rage, no tears, just this silence. Like someone had hit mute on my brain. My fingers went cold, my jaw locked. I wasn't shocked they let me go. What crushed me was when they chose to do it. They waited until the applause, until the champagne, until after I had poured everything I had into them. But here's what they didn't know. I wasn't just an engineer who built things, I was the architect, the strategist, the guy who knew where the cables ran behind the walls, the guy they should have never underestimated. And what they handed me that night wasn't a loss. It was permission, because they thought they were replacing me. They didn't realize they were activating me. The betrayal had been planned long before the gala. I should have seen it. I should have recognized the signs. The missed meetings, the hush-hush leadership dinners I wasn't invited to, the projects I was looped out of for vague political reasons. I'll show you how it all unraveled, and how I took everything they tried to steal and built something even greater, right under their nose. But before we go there, I need to ask you something. If you've ever been blindsided by people you trusted, hit the like button. Drop your story in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe, because what comes next is a lesson in justice you won't forget. The funny thing is, betrayal never shows up with a siren. It walks in quietly, dressed like routine, and in my case, it started with a calendar invite. A key strategy session for the upcoming quarter. Normally, I'd be leading it. I was the architect of the entire platform, after all. But this time, I wasn't listed as a presenter. Just another name in the optional attendees field. A red flag? Maybe. But I convinced myself it was a scheduling oversight, until it happened again. A second meeting, then a third. Suddenly, I was no longer being asked for input. I was being updated after decisions were already made. I started noticing the shift in tone, too. Executives who once praised me with phrases like visionary and cornerstone of this company now spoke to me like I was just support. The real sting? They weren't even hiding it anymore. They were just comfortable enough to let the mask slip. There was one day, 3 weeks before the gala, when everything clicked. I showed up early to an executive sync. I always do. I like the quiet moments before the chaos. The conference room door wasn't fully closed. I didn't mean to listen in, but when you hear your name, you freeze. I heard 2 voices, Malcolm, our COO, and Vivian, the new head of People Ops. Malcolm laughed, low and sharp. She's brilliant, sure, but she makes people nervous. Vivian followed, almost whispering, "We have a brand to protect. We can't build it around someone like him. Let him have his little moment with the deal. Then we move forward, cleanly." My blood went cold. They weren't debating. They had already decided. In that moment, standing outside that door like a ghost in my own building, something in me snapped into focus. I wasn't paranoid. I wasn't imagining things. They were cutting me out, surgically, precisely, while I was still delivering for them. And you want to know the worst part? I had helped Vivian climb the ladder. Years ago, she was a mid-level recruiter, barely holding her own in management meetings. I coached her, helped her find her voice, showed her how to lead without losing empathy, and now she was using those same skills to push me out. That day, I didn't barge in. I didn't confront them. I walked back to my desk like everything was normal. But in my head, I was already building something new, not out of revenge, out of necessity, because I knew what was coming, and I wasn't going to wait for them to take the last piece of me before I fought back. The day after I overheard Malcolm and Vivian plotting my exit, I got the call that should have rewritten everything. I was sitting at my desk, still reeling from what I'd heard, trying to decide if I should start boxing up my office or fight for my place. And then my phone lit up. Unknown number. Boston area code. I almost didn't answer, but something in me said I should. "Hello? This is Morgan Levant from Svanta," the voice on the other end said. "We've reviewed your proposal." My breath caught. Svanta was the white whale. The kind of client that doesn't just change a company's quarter, it changes its trajectory. And they weren't just reviewing, they were calling. Morgan didn't waste time. "We're in," she said. It took me a moment to register the words. 800 million over 5 years. Energy analytics, infrastructure modernization, carbon tracking, the whole package. But then she added something that made my pulse freeze. "There's one condition," she said. "You lead it, personally." I paused. "For you mean oversee the team?" "No, we want you. The deal's tied to your leadership. If you're not steering it, we're not signing." In that second, I understood the power of what I had built. The strategy, the frameworks, the architecture, the long nights redesigning algorithms that could predict efficiency losses before they even happened. All of it wasn't just good. It was indispensable. Not to my company, not to Malcolm, not to Vivian, but to Svanta. When I relayed the news during the executive update, I expected some kind of celebration. A nod, a handshake, maybe even reluctant praise. What I got was silence. Malcolm blinked. Slowly. "That's unexpected." Vivian didn't even try to hide it. "It's not typical for clients to dictate internal staffing." I didn't flinch. "This isn't a typical deal," I said. "This saves us. It rebuilds our position in the market overnight." I laid out the plan, what I needed: dedicated engineering, full pipeline access, scalable deployment in phases with quarterly deliverables. Malcolm barely nodded. "We'll get legal to draft it. Congrats." Congrats. That's all I got after saving their entire future. As I walked out of that room, I felt it again. That same hum beneath the surface. Only this time it wasn't anticipation. It was threat. They saw me not as a hero, but as a problem. They thought I had risen too far, too fast, and they weren't going to let me stay there much longer. After that meeting, I should have felt victorious. Instead, I felt disposable. The next morning, I walked into the office expecting a shift. Energy, maybe even respect. The kind that comes when you pull a sinking ship back to the surface. But what I got was nothing. No new responsibilities, no expanded role, no team restructuring to match the demands of the new deal. Emails from engineering leads started CCing me instead of sending direct. The meeting to align timelines with Svanta. It was scheduled without me. I found out through a forwarded invite. And when I asked Vivian about it later, she just smiled and said, "We thought you might be stretched too thin. We're streamlining the chain of communication." Streamlining. They were streamlining me out of the process I created. The engineering team was still with me. They knew the backbone of the system. They saw the code, the real-time updates, the predictive models humming underneath the dashboards. But leadership? Leadership treated me like I was lucky to be in the room. And yet I kept delivering. I worked with Svanta's integration leads. We matched tech stacks, drafted rollout protocols, layered cloud environments that could self-optimize across phases. Everything moved like clockwork. That should have been enough. But I had learned the hard way. Success doesn't win loyalty. It sharpens envy. The internal company newsletter came out that Friday. Celebrating our innovation leaders. Vivian was on the cover. Malcolm had a quote about transformational leadership, and the entire feature about the Svanta deal. It didn't mention my name once. Not in the byline, not in the acknowledgements, not even in a footnote. They wrote me out of my own story. That moment hit different. Not because I needed the spotlight. I never cared for credit. But because it was so intentional, so precise. They were preparing something, making it easier to erase me when the time came. I'd been at the company for over a decade. I'd been there through budget cuts, late-night rebuilds, client meltdowns, server crashes, and miracles. And now, the people I had pulled through those fires were watching in silence as I was gradually, quietly erased. No one said a word. because acknowledging me meant challenging the system that fed them, and no one wanted to lose their seat at the table. But I had already stopped fighting for their table. I was quietly building one of my own. There's something final about hearing people say out loud what you've been afraid to admit to yourself. I wasn't supposed to be in that hallway. I was on my way to grab a coffee before the leadership sink. I took a wrong turn through the back corridor near the smaller conference rooms. As I passed one, I heard voices. Not raised, just low enough to sound like truth. I paused. It was Malcolm and Vivian. Again. They didn't hear me. Or maybe they didn't care. "She thinks just because she closed that deal, she owns the place," Malcolm said. His voice was colder than I'd ever heard. Vivian let out a soft chuckle. "He's too intense. Clients might love him, but leadership never feels safe around people like that. We need stability, not volatility." Stability. That's what they called removing the person who built the very system they were about to sell as their future. "She's a technician," Malcolm added. "Not leadership material. Smart, yes, but replaceable." Vivian's voice went flat. "Let him have his night. The award. Let him feel like he made it. Then we move forward. Quietly. No mess." I stood there, frozen, my back pressed against the wall. It felt like a slow-motion car crash. You see it coming, but you can't stop it. I had taught Vivian how to read a room, how to navigate power without losing herself. I had defended Malcolm's decisions in boardrooms when no one else would, and here they were deciding how best to discard me without public fallout. They wanted me gone, but smiling. Gone, but still grateful. Gone, without making noise. I didn't walk into that room. I didn't demand answers. I just turned around and walked away. But something inside me had shifted. Before, I still believed that merit would win, that results could speak louder than politics. But I understood now. I wasn't being pushed out because I failed. I was being pushed out because I succeeded where I wasn't supposed to. I made myself indispensable, and that made me dangerous. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my apartment staring at my old freelance laptop, the one I hadn't touched in years, the one that didn't belong to the company, the one they couldn't track. They had made their plan. Now it was time I made mine. That night, with the city glowing outside my window and the echo of their words still fresh in my head, I opened the drawer where I kept my old freelance gear. It was a machine I hadn't powered on in years. No company software, no internal monitoring, just raw, untouched potential. When it booted up and the screen flickered to life, it felt like lighting a match in the dark. This wasn't about sabotage. This was about survival. I wasn't going to copy what I had built at the company. That would have been reckless. I was going to rebuild it, cleaner, faster, smarter, using only personal code, open-source libraries with independent licenses, old diagrams I had drawn up during sleepless nights but never shared. They'd called those too advanced, too risky. Now they were going to be my foundation. I named the project Helix, something that evolves from the inside, something quiet. Every night after work, I built. During the day, I played the part. I smiled at meetings. I nodded at Malcolm's fake encouragements. I let Vivian make suggestions she thought I was considering, but all the while I was separating everything. The version they had access to? That was the shell, the surface, enough to impress a demo room. But the real system? That one lived on my terms. I even built in defense mechanisms, remote deactivation triggers, logic chains that couldn't be transferred, admin protocols locked to biometric authentication. If they tried to run the platform without me, it wouldn't just fail, it would break, and they'd have no idea why. I also added something else, a watcher, a silent audit system that logged every access attempt, every download outside of approved usage, every backdoor entry Vivian or Malcolm might try in the shadows. Within a week, I had 14 entries. By the second week, 47. They were already digging into the code I hadn't shared, pulling data they weren't authorized to view, planning something deeper than just pushing me out. But I didn't panic. I kept building. Because when it came time to flip the switch, I wanted to be ready, not just to walk away, but to walk into something better. If you've ever had to plan your exit while smiling at the very people cutting you loose, you know exactly what that feels like building a parachute while the plane's already leaking fuel. If this part of the story hits close, if you've ever had to prepare your escape in silence like this video, Drop a comment and make sure to subscribe, because what comes next? That's when it gets real. By the third week, no one suspected a thing. To everyone at the company, I was the same person. The guy who brought in the deal, who sat through budget calls, who sent out weekly progress reports and answered questions in Slack like nothing had changed. But everything had. Every word I spoke in meetings was measured. Every update I gave was curated. I wasn't lying. I just wasn't giving them the full truth, because I had already built a second version, a platform that mimicked the original, but with no internal dependencies. A system that didn't rely on company assets or licenses, one that couldn't be claimed, copied, or tampered with. The difference was invisible, until you looked too closely. That's what made it beautiful. I kept their version stable, predictable, clean. I gave them dashboards, metrics, deliverables, all enough to keep Svante confident and leadership distracted. But the real architecture, that was mine now, and it was built for something entirely different. I rewrote the authentication layer, redesigned the data models, introduced a modular framework that could scale down for smaller teams, something I knew the company would never implement because it didn't fit their bloated structure. In my version, the platform didn't just analyze, it learned, adjusted itself based on usage trends, flagged inefficiencies, predicted failures. They didn't know it existed. They couldn't have known, because I didn't store it on company drives, didn't sync it to internal tools. It lived in a secure environment I managed personally, with backups, with protections, with code I'd been sketching in notebooks years before they even knew what the platform could be. And while I smiled through meetings, while Malcolm praised team collaboration and Vivian spun vague narratives about shared vision, I watched them walk confidently across glass floors I had designed to crack under pressure. I wasn't being paranoid. I was being precise, because I knew this wouldn't end with a thank you and a handshake. They didn't want me to just step aside. They wanted to erase me. But the problem with erasing someone like me is simple. You can't delete the architect without the blueprint falling apart. There's something I've always believed in. Control doesn't come from shouting the loudest. It comes from knowing where the quiet power lives. And in my world, that power was buried in a clause. Clause 17B. It sounded like any other legal formality, boring, procedural, dry. The kind of thing execs skim over while sipping their fourth coffee and thinking about their next bonus. But I wrote it myself, not out of paranoia, out of habit. Back in my freelance days, I learned the hard way that if you didn't write your own contracts, someone else would write you out of them. So even after I joined the company full-time, I kept that habit alive. Every time I worked on something that touched clients or code, especially something this big, I asked to review the legal terms. Malcolm rolled his eyes. Vivian told me to let the real lawyers handle it. But I pushed, and they let me. Clause 17B read like standard IP language, licensing and oversight conditions. But hidden inside the legalese was a firewall. It stated that the system, referred to only as Marshall Platform, not the company name, was licensed, not transferred. That the deployment rights were tied specifically to continued oversight by the architect or their designated successor, and that termination of said architect, without contractual fulfillment, could void the license entirely. Translation? If they cut me loose before the contract was delivered, they lost the system, and Svante, they could walk away. No penalties, no fees. It was clean, ironclad, and completely invisible, unless you knew where to look. They didn't know. They never read that far. They assumed the product and the person were separate, that the system would function on its own, that I was just another engineer, easily replaceable, easily silenced. But I had written the rules before they ever picked up the pen. They thought I was just a tool, but I was the one holding the trigger. That clause wasn't about revenge. It was about leverage. And when the time came, it would speak louder than any speech, louder than any firing memo, louder than any fake applause, because the moment they tried to erase me, the system would erase itself, and they wouldn't even know what hit them. There's a kind of betrayal that doesn't come with lies or confrontation. It comes with silence. It walks in quietly, closes the door behind it, and disappears before you can ask why. David Lynn. He wasn't just a colleague. He was my anchor. We started at the company around the same time, back when the floors still had scuffed carpet and the coffee machine leaked every other week. We built things side by side. He handled client ops. I handled systems. And somehow in the madness of it all, we kept each other sane. We had a ritual. No matter how bad things got, no matter how chaotic the week, we met for coffee every Thursday at 8:20 a.m. Same spot, same orders, like clockwork. But the morning after the strategy meeting, the one where I was shut down in front of finance, where Vivian used engineering background like a polite insult, I texted him. Coffee, 10 minutes. Tomorrow morning, same place. No response. Odd, but not alarming. The next morning I showed up early, ordered his drink, half-caff vanilla latte with almond milk, no foam. I knew it by heart. I sat there, watching the door, waiting. 8:25, 8:35, 8:50, nothing. At 9:10, I threw out both drinks and told myself maybe something came up. But I already knew. The confirmation came later that day. A short text. I'm sorry, I just can't be seen taking sides right now. Things are shifting. You understand? No, I didn't understand. Not then. Not after everything. This wasn't about policy or company politics. This was personal. This was someone choosing survival over loyalty. And that's when I realized Vivian and Malcolm weren't just cutting me off professionally. They were isolating me, intentionally. The leadership team had closed in, but worse than that, the people I thought were mine had already made their decision. I passed David in the hallway the next day. He nodded. I nodded back. Nothing else. That silence hurt more than the contract, more than the newsletter, more than hearing Vivian's voice behind that door, because it proved what I had been trying to deny. I wasn't one of them anymore. I was alone. But being alone, that also meant I was finally free to stop pretending. And from that moment on, I stopped fighting for a place at their table. I started building my own. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. I had just finished a call with Svanta's data science team. One of their VPs ended the session with a compliment that should have lit me up inside. You've raised the bar, honestly. We've never seen a vendor this in control of their own system. I muted the call, leaned back in my chair, and just breathed for a second. That's when I saw it. An email sitting in my personal inbox, not the company address. Subject line, Final NDA plus Transition Plan. The attachment, Marshall Offboarding 2025 D1 PDF. At first, I laughed. A mistake, maybe. Some administrative mix-up. I clicked it open anyway. The laughter stopped. There it was. My name, formatted with sterile precision, a full termination packet, a non-disparagement clause, a handover checklist, a polite recommendation to remain constructive during the transition period. 2 months of severance. No bonus. No retention. Nothing personal, except for one detail. Drafted by Vivian Cross. Approved by Malcolm Reed. Stamped with a date. 4 days before the awards ceremony. I hadn't been blindsided. I had been buried with applause as the shovel. The award, the lights, the speeches, all of it had been a smokescreen for what they had already signed. I walked down to HR, not to beg, not to plead, just to confirm. Kara, a junior associate, looked like she'd seen a ghost when I said my name. Oh my God, I think I sent that by accident. I was uploading the Q3 offboarding documents to archive and... She trailed off, face pale. So it's real, I said. She winced. It wasn't supposed to go out yet. Vivian asked me to hold it until after rollout. I didn't realize... I'm so sorry. I nodded. Not out of kindness, out of restraint. I didn't have time to comfort someone who helped deliver my execution, even if it was by accident. Back in my office, I read it again. The whole thing was written like I was being airbrushed out of a photograph, like I'd never been essential, like I'd never carried the weight of their failures on my back. But what they didn't know, what they never thought to check, was that I still held the key, not just to the system, to the contract, to the platform, to the future they were so desperate to steal. And now I had proof. The mask had slipped, and they couldn't unwrite what they had signed. The morning after I read my own termination, the city looked the same. Same skyline, same buzz of office lights and footsteps echoing down polished hallways. But inside me, something had shifted. There's a calm that comes after the breaking point, When you stop hoping for justice and you start creating your own. I sat at my desk, opened a spreadsheet. Not a company one, mine. A private document I'd kept updated over the years. Growth patterns, client retention trends, cross-market procurement shifts. Every company has a pulse, and I knew ours. I also knew who was catching up. Navax. They weren't on anyone's radar when I first heard of them. Just a quiet boutique consultancy started by Leah Morton, the former CTO of Auto, a client we lost because Malcolm had called them non-scalable. 6 months later, Leah built Navax from nothing. And now? They were showing up in government shortlists, clean energy portfolios, and internal whisper networks. While Elixis was clinging to the past, Navax was writing the next chapter. And I had just written the system they didn't know they needed. I didn't email, I didn't go through a form. I found her direct line, buried at the bottom of an old press release, and called. 3 rings. "This is Leah." Her voice was clipped, professional, the kind of voice that didn't like wasting time. "This is Marshall," I said. "I'm not calling from Elixis." A pause. Then, "Well, that's a name I didn't expect." "I have something," I told her. "A framework. They're using it. But they don't own it. Not legally, not architecturally, and I'm not going to let them." I didn't oversell it. I didn't need to. Silence. Then she said, "Send me a 20-minute roadmap deck by tomorrow. If it's real, I'll get my team in a room." "It's real," I replied, "and I'll have it to you by 10. I hung up. No adrenaline. Just alignment. I didn't want to destroy Elixis. Not then. What I wanted was something they refused to give me. Ownership, recognition. The space to build something on my own terms. So I turned back to my laptop, opened the Helix folder, and for the first time I renamed it. Navax U Transition V1. If you've ever handed the future to someone who saw your worth when others didn't, if you've ever walked away from those who tried to erase you, like this video, leave a comment and subscribe, because this story is far from over. By the time the leadership team was clinking glasses over project success, I had already finished the transfer. It didn't happen overnight. This kind of operation doesn't. But with every line of code, every closed-loop protocol, every silent push to the new server, I carved a deeper divide between what they thought they owned and what I actually controlled. The version they had access to, that was the mirror, the puppet, good enough to function, flashy enough to impress, but hollow on the inside. The real platform, the one that mattered, had already been redirected. Every live query rerouted through secure proxies. Every analytics pulse fed through synthetic replicas. I even left automated scripts that generated expected outputs for weekly reports, just enough noise to keep the illusion alive. What I was doing wasn't sabotage, it was containment, because they didn't own the platform. They rented it, and now I was preparing to revoke their license. Navax was sharp. Leah's team understood the framework immediately. They didn't ask how I built it, they asked how fast it could deploy. They wanted security, speed, and adaptability. So I gave them all 3. And in return, they gave me something I hadn't felt in years. Respect without hesitation. I worked every night after hours, rebuilding UI logic, cleaning dependencies, writing fresh architecture docs. There was no applause, no office small talk, just deep focus and clear intent. At the company, I kept playing the role. Malcolm still sent vague emails with phrases like strategic value alignment. Vivian still CC'd me on planning docs she knew I'd never touch. They thought I was too distracted, too tired, too afraid to fight. But I was just quiet. Quiet like a fuse burning toward detonation. 1 week before the shareholder event, I finalized the last piece, the deactivation trigger. If they ever tried to extract or clone the platform's logic, it would shut down instantly. All data access terminated, all sessions logged, all traces removed, and buried inside, locked beneath an encryption key tied to my biometric signature, was a message. A line of text they'd only see when it was too late. This was never yours. They were building their celebration, but I was building their expiration. A few more days and I wouldn't just be free. I'd be untouchable. The ballroom was glowing. Blue and silver uplights bounced off glass trophies. Crystal centerpieces shimmered beneath a ceiling full of carefully placed spotlights. Waiters in black ties floated through the crowd with champagne. It was a celebration of innovation, they said. They called it a tribute to vision, resilience, and leadership. And right in the middle of that polished corporate theater, I stood backstage with a wireless mic clipped to my collar and a sealed envelope in my hand. Vivian had handed it to me 5 minutes earlier. Just a little clarity for after the event, she said with that same gentle smile she'd worn the day she told me I was intense but valuable. She didn't know I had already seen it. I didn't need to open it to know it was my termination. Official, final, polished. They were dressing my funeral like a tribute. Then the announcer's voice echoed through the ballroom speakers. Please welcome to the stage the architect behind one of the most successful partnerships in our company's history. My name followed, crisp and bright. Applause exploded across the room. I walked out with the envelope still in my palm. Malcolm stood near the stage, clapping 2 beats too slow. I stepped up, took the trophy, held it up. Flashes from a dozen phones went off at once. The crowd roared, and inside I felt nothing. Not because I was broken, but because I had already left this place, mentally, strategically, structurally. This applause wasn't for me. It was for the version of me they thought they could keep. The MC leaned in, whispered, "Quick speech?" I nodded. "Thank you," I began, "for this recognition, for the opportunity to do work that mattered." I paused, looked around the room. When we started the Svante negotiations, some called it a long shot, too complex, too ambitious. But we saw something beneath the surface, something others overlooked. My voice was steady, calm, and I'm proud to say we didn't just close a deal. We built a foundation, one rooted in accountability, in clarity, and in resilience. The word lingered in the air like smoke, because real innovation isn't about invention, it's about foresight, about knowing when to lead and knowing when to let go. I gave a small smile, stepped back, more applause. They clapped like they meant it. But in a few days they'd understand the truth. I hadn't accepted an award. I'd buried a legacy. It happened at 10:07 a.m., 3 days after the ceremony. I wasn't at the office. I was sitting in a quiet cafe, 5 blocks away, hood up, headphones in, hands wrapped around a ceramic mug still warm from fresh espresso. On my screen, the Helix dashboard was pulsing green. System stable, all functions normal, until it wasn't. A line of red text appeared across the top of the screen. Unauthorized duplication attempt detected, protocol echelon initialized. There it was. They had finally done it. Someone at Elixis had tried to clone the core platform. Maybe they thought they were being smart. Maybe they were under pressure. Or maybe Malcolm just decided it was time to cut the cord once and for all. What they didn't know, what they never even imagined, was that they had just stepped on the tripwire. The system didn't shut down. It activated. Hidden deep inside the logic tree was a script that looked harmless. Echelon final sync.hh, but it wasn't syncing anything. It was detonating. Within seconds, every trace of unauthorized access was compiled. Every login using masked credentials, every clause of the contract they violated, every data transfer, every internal timestamp, encrypted, sealed, then sent to 3 destinations: the SEC's whistleblower division, Svante's legal team, and a senior tech editor at Future Ledger. There was no warning, no banner, no dramatic system crash, just truth, delivered with surgical precision. I didn't even flinch. I watched the final message display on the screen. Execution complete. This was never yours. And then, silence. At 11:45, I got a text from a former colleague in engineering. Short. Rushed. Svante walked, terminating contract, boards in full panic. I put my phone down, stared at the window. I didn't feel victory. I didn't feel relief. I felt release. This wasn't revenge. This was alignment. They had tried to steal something that never belonged to them, and the system didn't collapse because I sabotaged it. It collapsed because they never bothered to understand it, because they never bothered to understand me. By 1:20 p.m. it was official. Svante released a public statement. Due to confirmed licensing violations and failure to maintain contractual oversight conditions, Svante is withdrawing from all active engagements with Elixis Global. It hit the wire in under 5 minutes. Stock monitoring apps lit up like alarms. Within the hour, Elixir's shares had dropped 39%. By 3 internal Slack messages started leaking, screenshots of chaos, directors messaging legal emailing PR, HR demanding emergency calls with compliance. Someone even pulled a partial resignation draft Malcolm had typed but never sent. The media picked it up by 4:30. The headlines were merciless. Innovation undone, Elixir's implodes after platform scandal. From savior to liability, the fallout behind the Svante breakup. I didn't watch the press conference. I didn't need to. I already knew how it would go. I knew the tone, the fake regret, the polished phrases like internal misalignment and strategic missteps. They'd try to spin it. They'd try to salvage what they could. But you can't rebuild when your foundation was always a lie. Vivian released a memo to staff that evening, full of soft language. A moment of transition. A time to reflect and rebuild. Opportunities for growth through resilience. But there was no mention of me, no admission, just silence where my name should have been. Because to acknowledge what really happened would have meant confronting their own failure. They didn't just fire me. They fired the person who kept the system alive. And when they cut me out, they didn't just lose a strategist. They lost the very engine that kept their future moving. I opened the Helix logs one last time before shutting down the legacy interface. Everything had executed exactly as designed. Nothing broken, nothing stolen, just reclaimed. They celebrated my exit like it was the end of a chapter. But what they never understood is that I wasn't part of their story anymore. I had already written my own. 3 days after Elixir collapsed under the weight of its own ego, a new headline appeared. Navax launches breakthrough analytics platform, developed by Marshall. There it was, my name. Not buried in footnotes, not erased from dashboards. Front, center, permanent, LinkedIn posts, industry newsletters, panels reaching out for speaking engagements. Even executives who once ignored my emails were quoting me in press releases like we'd been close all along. I didn't say anything, because I didn't need to. I had built the system. But now, I owned the story. The Navax rollout took 6 weeks. Lean team, clear priorities, no layers of politics or optics to manage. We deployed to 2 clean energy firms and 1 logistics company. Then a government contract inquiry came in. No backroom deals, no games, just results. And for the first time in years, the team around me didn't ask me to shrink. They didn't ask me to tone down or defer credit. They said, "You earned this. Let's build." And so we did. I named the new platform Athena Insight. Smarter, faster, free. The system they tried to steal, it wasn't even the best version. That one was mine now. Leah, the founder of Navax, didn't pretend to lead what I had created. She gave me space to architect it and trust to grow it. There was no trophy, no speech, just quiet, sharp respect. A week after launch, I got a voicemail from Vivian. Polite, measured. Her voice carried that same polished tone, but there was a tremble beneath it now. "Marshall, I think we owe it to ourselves to talk. Just us. There are things you don't understand." She was wrong. I understood everything, and I didn't respond. Not out of spite, but because I no longer owed anyone my energy who couldn't see my value until it was gone. Malcolm eventually stepped down voluntarily. The board launched an internal investigation, but that wasn't my war anymore. I had already walked off their battlefield, and on the other side I built something stronger, not a comeback, a beginning. People still ask me if I regret how far I went, if it was worth it, and I tell them this. Sometimes the strongest move you can make is walking away and never looking back. If you've ever been underestimated, written off or replaced, only to rise higher than they ever imagined, this story was for you. Like this video, share your story in the comments and subscribe. We're building something real here, one truth at a time, and your voice matters.